Picture yourself standing in the scorching heat of Jerusalem, the year 1118. The stones beneath your feet still hold the echo of ancient prayers, and the air carries whispers of secrets that have waited centuries to be uncovered. You're watching 9 knights dressed in simple white robes marked with a red cross as they approach the most sacred site in the Holy Land. But they're not here to pray. They're here to dig. What they're about to discover will shake the foundations of Christianity itself, and the Church will spend the next 9 centuries trying to bury it. Again, these men call themselves the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. History knows them as the Knights Templar. But their mission in Jerusalem wasn't what the world was told. They weren't there to protect pilgrims or guard the roads. They were there to find something specific, something that had been hidden beneath the Temple Mount for over 1,000 years. You see, the official story never made sense. 9 knights protecting the pilgrim routes of an entire kingdom? It's laughable. The roads stretched for hundreds of miles, through deserts and mountain passes. 9 men couldn't possibly secure them all, but that wasn't their real purpose. They had come to Jerusalem with maps, with knowledge, with a mission that had been passed down through secret channels since the fall of the temple. Eudepaeans. Their leader wasn't just a random knight seeking glory. He was connected to Bernard of Clairvaux, one of the most powerful figures in the Catholic Church. Bernard had access to ancient texts, to documents that spoke of treasures hidden beneath Solomon's temple before its destruction, documents that mentioned not just gold or silver, but something far more dangerous to the established order of things. The knights set up their headquarters directly above the ruins of Solomon's temple. For 9 years they barely recruited a single new member. 9 years of secrecy, of careful excavation, of following tunnels that led deep into the bedrock of the Temple Mount. And then, suddenly they emerged from those tunnels as the most powerful military order in Christendom. What changed? What did they find down there in the darkness beneath Jerusalem? The answer lies in understanding what Solomon's temple really was. It wasn't just a place of worship. It was a repository, a vault designed to preserve the most sacred artifacts of the Jewish faith. When the Babylonians destroyed the first temple in 586 BCE, the priests had advance warning. They had time to hide things, to secret away objects that were too precious, too powerful, to fall into enemy hands. But here's where the story gets dangerous for the Church, because what the Templars found wasn't just Jewish artifacts. It was something that predated Judaism itself, something that connected directly to the origins of monotheistic religion. Something that could rewrite the entire narrative of Western civilization. The tunnels beneath the Temple Mount aren't natural. They were carved by human hands, following precise geometric patterns that mirror the layout of the temple above. Modern archaeologists have confirmed the existence of these passages, though access is strictly controlled by religious authorities. What they found in the limited areas they've been allowed to explore matches medieval descriptions of the Templar excavations perfectly. The knights weren't digging randomly. They knew exactly where to look. Their excavations followed the same path described in a document known as the Copper Scroll, one of the Dead Sea scrolls discovered in 1947. This ancient text describes 64 locations where temple treasures were hidden, including specific references to chambers beneath the Holy of Holies. But the Templars weren't just treasure hunters. They were seeking something specific, something that had been described in coded language in certain Gnostic texts that had survived the early church's purges. These documents spoke of the foundation stone of the world, a relic that contained the true name of God and held power over life and death itself. You can imagine the moment when their torches first illuminated that hidden chamber. The silence broken only by the sound of their breathing, the weight of centuries pressing down from above. And there, in the darkness, waiting as it had waited for over a millennium, was something that would change everything they thought they knew about their faith. What they discovered wasn't just an artifact. It was proof. Proof that the stories they'd been told about the origins of their religion were incomplete, or worse, deliberately false. Proof that there had been others before, others who had known truths that the church had spent centuries trying to erase. The relic they found wasn't Christian in origin. It was older, much older, and it bore inscriptions in a language that shouldn't have existed, describing knowledge that challenged every doctrine the medieval church held sacred. Knowledge about the true nature of divinity, about the relationship between humanity and the divine, about powers that existed beyond the narrow confines of Catholic theology. This discovery explains everything that came after. Why the Templars suddenly gained unprecedented power within the church hierarchy. Why Pope Innocent II issued the bull Omni Datum Optimum in 1139, granting them autonomy that no religious order had ever possessed. Why they were allowed to keep their own priests, build their own churches, had answered to no authority except the Pope himself. The church needed to control them because of what they knew, but the Templars had learned to use their knowledge as leverage. They held the ultimate trump card, evidence that could destroy the foundations of Christian authority if it ever became public. The relic gave them power, but it also marked them for destruction, because secrets this dangerous can never truly be allowed to exist in the open. The church would tolerate their knowledge for nearly 2 centuries, using their military might and financial resources to expand Christian dominion across Europe and the Holy Land. But eventually, the risk would become too great, and the Templars would pay the ultimate price for their discovery. But here's what the church didn't count on. The Templars weren't fools. They knew their knowledge made them dangerous to their allies as well as their enemies. So they took precautions. They hid copies, created backup plans, established networks that could preserve their secrets even if the order itself was destroyed. The relic that started it all, the forbidden artifact they pulled from that chamber beneath Jerusalem, didn't disappear when the Templars fell. It was hidden again, passed along secret channels, protected by those who understood its true significance. And according to some, it's still out there, waiting for the day when the world is ready to hear the truth about what those 9 knights really discovered in the darkness beneath Solomon's temple. As you stand here in modern Jerusalem, looking up at the dome of the rock that now covers the site where it all began, you might wonder, what would happen if that relic surfaced today? What would it mean for the billion Christians who have built their faith on the stories the church has chosen to tell them? The answer to that question is exactly why the Vatican has spent 9 centuries making sure it never happens. Because some truths are too dangerous to be spoken aloud, even in whispers. Deep beneath your feet, as you walk across the stone plaza surrounding the dome of the rock, lies a network of tunnels that most of the world has never seen. Chambers carved from living rock, passages that waned through the foundations of the most contested piece of real estate on earth. And somewhere in that labyrinth, the Knights Templar made their discovery. But to understand what they found, you need to understand what they were looking for. The Templars didn't arrive in Jerusalem empty-handed. They came armed with knowledge that had been carefully preserved in the libraries of European monasteries, documents that spoke of the last days of Solomon's temple in language so coded that only initiates could decipher their true meaning. One of these documents was a copy of the Testament of Solomon, a text that the Church had officially declared apocryphal, but had never quite managed to destroy completely. This ancient work described not just the building of the temple, but its true purpose as a container for power that transcended the physical world. It spoke of a chamber beneath the Holy of Holies, where the seal of seals was hidden, an object that held dominion over the forces of creation itself. Another text that guided their search was a fragment of the lost Gospel of the Hebrews, which contained a curious passage about Jesus' time in the temple as a child. In this version of the story, the young Jesus doesn't just astound the rabbis with his wisdom. He speaks of things hidden beneath the foundation stone where Abraham bound Isaac, knowledge that shall remain sealed until the children of the temple return to claim their inheritance. These weren't random treasure maps. They were breadcrumbs left by those who had hidden something precious before the Romans destroyed the second temple in 70 CE. The early Christians had access to Jewish traditions that spoke of sacred objects concealed in the bedrock beneath the Temple Mount, waiting for a time when they could safely be revealed. The Templars' excavation began in earnest in 1120, 2 years after their official formation. They worked in secret, entering the tunnels through a concealed entrance in what had once been the stables of the Crusader kings. Local Muslim authorities were told they were conducting repairs to the foundation, a cover story that allowed them to work undisturbed for nearly a decade. What they found in those tunnels wasn't immediately apparent from their official records. The Templars were obsessively secretive about their activities, and their internal documents were written in a code that modern scholars have only partially deciphered. But clues exist in the architectural innovations they introduced after their return to Europe and the sudden influx of wealth that funded their rapid expansion, and in the strange symbols that began appearing in their churches and castles. The breakthrough came in the 7th year of their excavation. Brother Geoffrey de St. Omer, one of the 9 founding knights, recorded in his private journal that they had discovered the chamber of the foundation, a perfectly circular room carved directly beneath where the Ark of the Covenant had once rested in the Holy of Holies. The chamber was empty except for a single stone altar in its center, and embedded in that altar was something that defied explanation. Geoffrey described it as a vessel of impossible geometry, neither gold nor silver, nor any metal known to man, yet shining with inner light that required no flame to kindle it. But it wasn't the physical appearance of the relic that shocked the Templars. It was what happened when they touched it. According to Geoffrey's account, the moment Hugh de Payens placed his hand upon the artifact, the chamber filled with voices speaking in a language none of them recognized, but all of them somehow understood. The voices told them things about the true history of their faith that contradicted everything they had been taught. They spoke of earlier prophets, of divine revelations that predated Moses, of a tradition of hidden knowledge that connected all the world's great religions. More disturbing still, the voices spoke of the future. They described the rise and fall of the Crusader kingdoms, the eventual destruction of the Templar order, and a time centuries in the future when humanity would face a choice between spiritual evolution and self-destruction. The relic wasn't just a historical artifact. It was active, intelligent, capable of communicating with those who possessed the wisdom to understand its message. And that message challenged the very foundations of medieval Christianity. The voices told the Templars that the God they worshipped was not the ultimate divine reality, but merely one aspect of a cosmic consciousness that transcended human understanding. They learned that Jesus had been initiated into this ancient wisdom tradition during his lost years, the period between his childhood appearance in the temple and the beginning of his public ministry that the Gospels pass over in silence. Most shocking of all, they discovered that the early church had deliberately suppressed this knowledge, choosing to present a simplified version of Christ's teachings that emphasized obedience to ecclesiastical authority rather than direct spiritual experience. The true message of Christianity, the voices explained, was about humanity's potential for divine consciousness, not submission to religious hierarchy. The Templars faced an impossible choice. They could return to Europe and report their discovery to the Church, knowing that it would likely result in their excommunication or execution as heretics. Or they could keep the secret, using their newfound knowledge to gain power and influence. While working to preserve the truth for future generations, they chose a third path. They would become guardians of the secret, using their position within the Church to protect the relic, while slowly introducing its teachings to those ready to receive them. It was a dangerous game that would ultimately lead to their destruction, but for nearly 2 centuries, it allowed them to become the most powerful and influential organization in medieval Europe. The relic remained in their custody, hidden in a specially constructed chamber beneath their preceptory in Jerusalem. They built their entire organization around protecting it, creating layers of secrecy and initiation that ensured only the most trusted members ever learned of its existence. But the secret was too dangerous to keep in a single location. As their power grew and they established commanderies across Europe, they created a network of hiding places, a conspiracy of silence that could preserve the relic even if their base in Jerusalem was lost. And they were right to be cautious. In 1187, Saladin recaptured Jerusalem, forcing the Templars to evacuate their headquarters. But by then, the relic was no longer there. It had been spirited away to a location known only to the highest ranks of the order, beginning a journey through the shadows of history that continue to this day. The chamber beneath the Temple Mount still exists, though it remains sealed and inaccessible to all but a handful of religious authorities. Modern ground-penetrating radar has confirmed the existence of additional cavities in the bedrock, spaces that match medieval descriptions of the Templar excavations. But accessing them would require the cooperation of Islamic, Jewish, and Christian religious leaders, an unlikely scenario given the political tensions surrounding the site. Yet sometimes, during the quiet hours before dawn, workers in the tunnels beneath the western wall report strange phenomena, voices speaking in unknown languages, lights that appear to have no source, and a persistent feeling that something powerful remains hidden in the darkness, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself once again. The Templars are gone, but their secret lives on, hidden in plain sight, protected by those who understand that some truths are too important to be lost and too dangerous to be spoken freely. The relic that changed everything still exists, still holds its ancient knowledge, still waits for humanity to be ready for the revolution it represents. And, perhaps, as the world stands on the brink of changes that would dwarf even the upheavals of the medieval period, that time is closer than we think. You're holding something that could destroy 1,000 years of religious doctrine. The weight of it isn't in the metal or stone, but in the knowledge it contains. This is what the Templars felt when they first decoded the inscriptions covering every surface of their forbidden relic. The artifact wasn't just a vessel or a tool. It was a library, a repository of information that had been encoded in symbols that seemed to shift and change depending on how the light struck them. The Templars quickly realized they weren't dealing with ordinary writing. This was something far more sophisticated, a technology that could store vast amounts of information in a form that would remain stable for millennia. Brother André de Montbard, nephew of Bernard of Clairvaux and one of the 9 founding knights, became the order's primary interpreter of the relic's messages. His private notes, discovered centuries later in a sealed chamber beneath the Templar commandery at Paines, reveal the shocking scope of what they learned. The inscriptions told a story that began long before recorded history. They spoke of an advanced civilization that had achieved a level of spiritual and technological development that dwarfed anything known to medieval minds. This civilization had understood the true nature of consciousness and its relationship to what we call physical reality. According to the relic's testimony, what we experience as the material world is actually a projection, a kind of holographic interference pattern created by the interaction of consciousness with underlying quantum fields. The ancients had learned to manipulate these fields directly, achieving what appeared to be miraculous powers, but was actually applied science based on a deeper understanding of reality's true nature. More disturbing to the Templars' Christian worldview was the revelation that this knowledge hadn't been lost accidentally. It had been deliberately suppressed by successive religious and political authorities who recognized that an enlightened population would be impossible to control. The relic contained detailed accounts of how mystery schools had been infiltrated and destroyed, how texts had been altered or destroyed, how the very language used to describe spiritual reality had been corrupted over time. The figure known to history as Jesus of Nazareth had been initiated into these ancient mysteries during his travels in the East. The lost years of his life, between his appearance in the temple as a child and the beginning of his ministry at age 30, had been spent studying with the last keepers of the old knowledge in Tibet, India, and Egypt. When Jesus returned to Palestine, he attempted to restore this wisdom tradition among his own people. His parables weren't simple moral stories, but encoded instructions for achieving higher states of consciousness. His miracles weren't supernatural interventions, but demonstrations of what became possible when someone learned to work with the fundamental forces of creation rather than against them. The early church had faced a choice: preserve Jesus' actual teachings and risk losing control over their followers, or create a simplified mythology that emphasized faith over direct experience. They chose control over truth, gradually editing out the esoteric elements of Christianity and replacing them with doctrines designed to maintain ecclesiastical authority. But the relic contained more than just revelations about the past. It also described techniques, practices that could awaken dormant potentials within human consciousness. The Templars began experimenting with these methods, starting cautiously but gradually growing bolder as they discovered their effectiveness. They learned to enter altered states of consciousness that allowed them to perceive beyond the normal limits of space and time. They developed abilities that their contemporaries could only describe as supernatural: enhanced intuition, healing powers, and an uncanny ability to predict future events. These skills gave them enormous advantages in warfare, politics, and finance, explaining their rapid rise to power throughout the 12th and 13th centuries. The famous Templar tactical innovations weren't just military strategies. They were applications of knowledge derived from the relic. Their ability to coordinate complex operations across vast distances without modern communications was based on techniques for telepathic connection between initiates. Their legendary financial acumen came from an understanding of economic patterns that transcended normal cause and effect relationships. But with knowledge came responsibility, and with power came temptation. The Templars found themselves walking a tightrope between using their abilities to advance their mission and becoming corrupted by the very power they wielded. Some members of the order argued for revealing their discoveries to the world, believing that humanity was ready for a new level of spiritual evolution. Others insisted that the knowledge must remain secret until a future time when it could be safely disseminated. A growing faction believed they should use their power to reshape civilization according to their understanding of cosmic law. This internal tension eventually split the order into multiple factions, each with its own interpretation of their responsibility to the secret. Some remained loyal to the Church while working to gradually introduce reforms. Others began planning to overthrow the existing religious and political order entirely. A third group focused on preserving the knowledge for future generations, creating hidden networks that could survive even if the Templars themselves were destroyed. The relic itself seemed to respond to these divisions within the order. Templars reported that its messages became increasingly cryptic and contradictory, as if it were testing their wisdom or warning them about the dangers of their situation. Some interpreted this as evidence that the artifact possessed its own intelligence and agenda. By the late 13th century, the Templars' secret knowledge had made them effectively independent of all earthly authority. They answered to no king, owed allegiance to no nation, and possessed capabilities that made them potentially more powerful than the Church itself. They had become something unprecedented in medieval Europe, a transnational organization united by esoteric knowledge rather than political or economic interests. This independence was both their greatest strength and their fatal weakness, made them indispensable to Europe's rulers, who relied on Templar services for everything from banking to military expertise. But it also made them a threat to the established order, a wild card that could not be controlled through traditional means of political pressure. The knowledge encoded in their relic had transformed the Templars from simple warrior monks into something entirely new, guardians of humanity's spiritual potential. keepers of truths that could revolutionize human civilization. But it had also marked them for destruction by forces that would never tolerate such dangerous independence. As Philip IV of France began planning his assault on the order in the early 1300s, the Templars knew their time was running short. The relic had warned them of this day, had shown them visions of their trials and executions, but it had also revealed that their apparent destruction would not be the end of their mission. The knowledge would survive, the network would endure, and someday, when humanity was finally ready, the truths they had died to protect would emerge from the shadows to transform the world in ways that medieval minds could barely imagine. That day, according to the relics, prophecies is fast approaching. The signs are unmistakable to those who know how to read them. And somewhere, hidden away from the eyes of both church and state, the forbidden artifact continues to wait, its ancient intelligence preparing for the moment when its secrets can finally be revealed. You can feel them watching you even now, centuries after their official destruction. The Templars may have burned at the stake, but their network survived, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the moment when their forbidden knowledge could safely emerge from the shadows. This network didn't develop by accident. It was carefully planned and methodically implemented, based on instructions encoded within their mysterious relic. The artifact hadn't just revealed the suppressed history of humanity's spiritual potential. It had also provided detailed blueprints for preserving dangerous knowledge across generations of persecution and upheaval. The system the Templars created was revolutionary for its time, a cellular structure where each group operated independently, connected to others only through carefully controlled channels. Members of one cell might never know the true identities of those in other groups, but they all shared allegiance to the same ultimate goal. It was a model that would later be copied by secret societies, revolutionary movements, and intelligence agencies throughout history. Master Guillaume de Beaujeu, the last Grand Master to die defending Acre in 1291, had foreseen the coming persecution. Working with a select council of the most trusted Templars, he implemented what they called the Great Dispersal, a plan that would scatter their resources, knowledge, and most precious artifacts across dozens of hidden locations throughout Europe and beyond. The relic itself was too dangerous to remain in any single location. Using techniques described in its inscriptions, the Templars learned to create what they called resonance fragments, smaller artifacts that maintained a connection to the original while being able to function independently. These fragments were distributed to key members of the network, ensuring that the knowledge could survive even if the primary relic was lost or destroyed. Each fragment contained a portion of the overall information encoded in the same shifting, symbolic language that covered the original artifact. But they were designed so that only someone possessing multiple fragments could access the deeper levels of knowledge. It was a safeguard against corruption or misuse, ensuring that no single individual could wield the full power of their discovery. The first hiding place was established beneath the Cathedral of Chartres, where Templar architects had already incorporated sacred geometry and hidden symbols into the building's design. A secret chamber was constructed during the cathedral's renovation, accessible only through a hidden passage that began in the crypt and led deep into the bedrock beneath the nave. Other sanctuaries followed, The Templar commandery at Tomar in Portugal became a repository for manuscripts and smaller artifacts. The mysterious chapel at Rosslyn in Scotland was built according to designs that encoded mathematical principles derived from the relic's teachings. Hidden chambers in German castles, French monasteries, and Italian palaces formed a network of safe houses that could shelter both objects and people when necessary. But the network wasn't limited to physical locations. The Templars also infiltrated existing organizations, placing their agents in positions where they could influence events and protect their interests. They established relationships with merchant guilds, monastic orders, and noble families who shared their vision of a transformed human civilization. The most successful of these infiltrations was within the Church itself, despite their eventual persecution by the Vatican. Many Templars had maintained their faith in the essential message of Christianity, even as they rejected the institutional corruption that had obscured its true meaning. These knights took new identities as priests, monks, and scholars, working from within to preserve both Christian mysticism and the ancient wisdom they had discovered. Brother Thomas de Thoraldvie, one of the Templars who escaped the mass arrests of 1307, established himself as a Benedictine monk at the Abbey of Mont Saint-Michel. From this position, he was able to influence the copying and preservation of manuscripts, ensuring that certain lost texts were actually hidden rather than destroyed. His efforts preserved dozens of documents that would have otherwise been lost to the Inquisition's fires. Similar operations were established throughout Europe. Templar refugees became Franciscan friars in Italy, Dominican scholars in Spain, and Cistercian abbots in Germany. They brought with them not just their personal knowledge, but also carefully concealed portions of their treasury and artifact collection. The network extended beyond Europe's borders as well. Templar ships had been exploring routes to the Americas decades before Columbus, following navigation techniques derived from their relics' astronomical information. When the persecution began, entire fleets disappeared from European ports, carrying both refugees and treasures to sanctuaries in the New World. These expeditions established colonies that would later influence the development of both North and South America. The famous Money Pit of Oak Island in Nova Scotia shows clear evidence of medieval construction techniques and may represent one of their most elaborate hiding places. Similar sites have been identified from Chile to Canada, all sharing architectural features that match Templar design principles. The network's influence can be traced through the development of Renaissance thought, as former Templars and their descendants helped fund and guide the intellectual revolution that transformed European culture. The sudden availability of ancient texts that had supposedly been lost for centuries, the rapid advancement in fields like astronomy and mathematics, and the emergence of humanistic philosophy all bear the fingerprints of Templar intervention. Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks contain numerous references to geometric principles that match those encoded in Templar architecture. Copernicus's revolutionary astronomical theories were based partly on star charts that had supposedly been lost since antiquity, but showed remarkable accuracy for their alleged age. The Hermetic tradition that influenced thinkers like Paracelsus and John Dee drew heavily on texts that had somehow survived the medieval period's various purges. By the time of the Protestant Reformation, the network had become sufficiently influential to shape the religious upheaval that split European Christianity. Many of the movement's leaders had been educated in schools founded by Templar refugees or their descendants. The emphasis on direct spiritual experience over ecclesiastical authority reflected principles that the Templars had derived from their relics centuries earlier. The scientific revolution of the 17th and 18th centuries similarly bore the network's influence. The Royal Society of London, the French Academy of Sciences, and similar institutions were founded by men who had access to preserved knowledge that gave them significant advantages in understanding natural phenomena. Isaac Newton's alchemical studies drew on texts that the Templars had translated from Arabic sources, while his mathematical insights reflected geometric principles encoded in their sacred architecture. But perhaps the network's greatest achievement was its role in the development of democratic ideals and human rights. The concept that all individuals possessed inherent dignity and the right to pursue spiritual development without interference from political or religious authority was central to Templar philosophy. This vision influenced the English Civil War, the American Revolution, and the French Revolution, as network members and sympathizers worked to create political systems that would allow for the eventual revelation of their hidden knowledge. The United States Constitution contains numerous provisions that reflect Templar principles, from the separation of church and state to the emphasis on individual liberty. Many of the founding fathers had connections to organizations that traced their lineage back to the medieval knights, and some historians argue that the American experiment itself was designed to create conditions where the ancient wisdom could finally be safely revealed. Today, the network continues to operate, though its methods have evolved with changing times. Modern members may never meet in person, communicating instead through encrypted digital channels that would have seemed magical to their medieval predecessors. But their mission remains the same: preserving humanity's spiritual heritage while working to create a world where that knowledge can transform civilization rather than destroy it. The relic that started it all remains hidden, protected by security measures that blend ancient wisdom with cutting-edge technology. But its influence continues to spread, encoded in everything from architectural landmarks to scientific discoveries to works of art. Those who know how to read the signs can see its fingerprints everywhere, waiting for the moment when humanity is finally ready to reclaim its forgotten birthright. And that moment, according to the prophecies encoded within the artifact itself, may be closer than anyone imagines. You're standing in a room that doesn't officially exist, deep beneath the Vatican's apostolic palace. The walls are lined with documents that tell a story the Church has spent 700 years trying to erase. This is where the real history of the Templar persecution lives, and the truth is far more complex and terrifying than any simplified tale of greed and power. Pope Clement V didn't want to destroy the Templars. The sealed letters discovered in the Vatican's secret archives in 2001 prove that he fought desperately to save them, even as political pressure from Philip IV of France made their survival increasingly impossible. But more revealing than what he tried to do is why he was so determined to protect an order that had become dangerously independent of papal authority. Clement knew what they had found in Jerusalem. The Church's awareness of the Templars' discovery began with Brother Francis of Assisi himself. During his journey to the Holy Land in 1219, Francis had sought out the Templar leadership in Jerusalem, hoping to understand why they had gained such extraordinary influence so quickly. What he learned during his secret meetings with them changed the trajectory of his entire ministry. Upon his return to Italy, Francis established what he called the Third Order, a lay organization that would preserve certain teachings for those not ready for full monastic life. But the real purpose of this group was to create a channel of communication between the Templars and reform-minded elements within the church hierarchy. Through this network, selected church officials learned about the relic and its revelations. The response was immediate and dramatic. Rather than condemn the discovery as heretical, many recognized it as confirmation of truths that had been hidden within Christian mysticism for centuries. Cardinal Giovanni di Fidanza, better known as Saint Bonaventure, became one of the most influential advocates for integrating the Templar knowledge with Orthodox theology. His philosophical works, still studied today, carefully encode many of the principles revealed by the relic, presenting them in language that would satisfy church censors while preserving their essential meaning for initiates. The real theological revolution began with the rise of scholasticism, the intellectual movement that sought to reconcile reason with faith. Thinkers like Albertus Magnus and Thomas Aquinas had access to translated texts that the Templars had acquired during their excavations, materials that provided a more sophisticated understanding of the relationship between divine and human consciousness. Aquinas's Summa Theologica contains numerous references to concepts that can only have derived from the Templar discoveries. His discussion of the beatific vision mirrors techniques for achieving higher states of consciousness that were encoded in the relic's inscriptions. His analysis of angelic hierarchies reflects an understanding of interdimensional reality that wouldn't become scientifically acceptable until the development of quantum mechanics centuries later. But as knowledge of the Templars' secret spread through church leadership, it created a dangerous schism. Progressive elements saw an opportunity to restore Christianity to its original mystical foundations, while conservatives recognized a threat to institutional authority that could destroy the Church's temporal power. The conservatives were led by Cardinal Benedetto Citani, who would later become Pope Boniface VIII. Citani understood that the Templars' knowledge represented an existential threat to the medieval church's entire structure. If people learned that direct spiritual experience was possible without ecclesiastical mediation, the basis for papal authority would crumble overnight. The conflict between these factions played out through a series of increasingly desperate political maneuvers. The progressives attempted to gradually introduce Templar insights through approved theological works and mystical practices. The conservatives worked to isolate and ultimately destroy the source of the dangerous knowledge. Boniface VIII's famous Bull Unum Sanctam was actually a response to the Templar threat, asserting absolute papal supremacy in both spiritual and temporal matters. But by this time, the Knights had become so powerful that even the Pope couldn't move against them directly. Their financial networks were too important to European commerce, their military capabilities too valuable to the crusading effort, and their knowledge too seductive to potential allies within the Church itself. The solution came through Philip IV of France, whose massive debts to the Templars gave him personal motivation to see them destroyed. But Philip's involvement wasn't coincidental. Cardinal Citani had spent years cultivating relationships with European monarchs who could be used as weapons against threats to church authority. That the charges brought against the Templars during their trial weren't random accusations of heresy. They were carefully crafted to discredit specific aspects of the knowledge the Knights had acquired. The alleged worship of Baphomet was a distortion of practices derived from the relics' teachings about the nature of consciousness. The accusations of ritual sodomy misrepresented techniques for achieving states of mystical union that transcended ordinary physical boundaries. Most revealing of all were the charges related to denying Christ and spitting on the cross. These weren't acts of devil worship as the prosecutors claimed, but rejection of the institutionalized version of Christianity that the Templars saw as a corruption of Jesus' actual teachings. They had learned from their relic that the historical Christ had taught something far more radical and transformative than the simplified salvation mythology promoted by the medieval church. The trials themselves were a carefully orchestrated show designed to discredit the Templars' knowledge without revealing what that knowledge actually contained. The confessions extracted through torture were scripted to make the Knights appear as deluded heretics rather than keepers of dangerous truth. But the Church's real response to the Templar threat went far beyond the public persecution. A secret council was established to locate and neutralize any surviving artifacts or documents that might contain the forbidden knowledge. This group, operating under the direct authority of the papal throne, became the prototype for what would later evolve into more sophisticated Vatican intelligence operations. The Inquisition, officially created to combat Cathar heresy in southern France, was actually designed with the Templar threat in mind. Its methods were specifically developed to identify and eliminate networks of hidden knowledge, whether they involved surviving Templars or other groups that might have acquired similar dangerous insights. Pope John XXII, Clement V's successor, formalized these efforts through the creation of what he called the Sacred Congregation for the Defense of Faith. This organization was tasked with monitoring intellectual developments throughout Europe, identifying potential threats to church authority, and developing strategies for neutralizing dangerous knowledge before it could spread. The congregation's first major operation involved the systematic infiltration of universities and monastic schools. Agents were placed among faculty and students to identify any teaching that showed signs of Templar influence. Books were examined for coded language that might conceal forbidden knowledge. Scholars who demonstrated unusual insights into mathematics, astronomy, or natural philosophy were subjected to careful investigation. This surveillance network eventually evolved into the modern Vatican's relationship with scientific research. The Church learned to position itself as a patron and monitor of intellectual development, ensuring that potentially threatening discoveries could be guided, suppressed, or coacted as circumstances required. But the most significant aspect of the Church's response was its development of counter-narratives, designed to explain away any evidence of the Templars' true discoveries. The treasure of Solomon's temple was redefined as gold and jewels rather than knowledge and artifacts. The Knights' unusual practices were attributed to devil worship rather than advanced spiritual techniques. Their rapid rise to power was explained through political cunning and military skill rather than access to transformative wisdom. These alternative explanations were so thoroughly integrated into official church history that they became accepted fact. Even today, most scholars who study the Templars accept the Vatican's version of events, never questioning why an order of supposedly greedy and corrupt knights would choose martyrdom over confession, or why their persecution required such an elaborate international conspiracy. The relic that started it all was never found by church investigators, despite extensive searches of former Templar properties. The Knights had learned too well from their artifacts' teachings about the importance of preserving knowledge across generations. By the time the persecution began, the most dangerous secrets had already been scattered to locations that the Church would never think to search. But the Vatican's campaign against Templar knowledge didn't end with their official destruction. It continued through the Renaissance, the Reformation, and into the modern era, adapting its methods as new threats emerged. The Index of Forbidden Books, the condemnation of Galileo, the suppression of mystical movements, all reflected the Church's ongoing fear that someone might rediscover the truths the Templars had unearthed in Jerusalem. Today, the Sacred Congregation continues its work under different names and with more sophisticated methods. Modern Vatican intelligence operations monitor scientific research, archaeological discoveries, and even popular culture for signs that the forbidden knowledge might be surfacing again. The Church has learned to work through secular institutions when necessary, ensuring that certain discoveries never receive funding, certain sites are never excavated, and certain theories never gain academic acceptance. The irony is that the Church's own actions have preserved evidence of what they sought to destroy. The very intensity of their response to the Templars proves that something extraordinary was discovered in those tunnels beneath Jerusalem. No organization mounts a 7th-century campaign against a phantom threat. Somewhere in the Vatican archives, locked away in sections that even cardinals cannot access, are documents that tell the real story of what the Church learned about the Templar discovery. Transcripts of secret trials where knights revealed their knowledge under torture. Reports from agents who infiltrated surviving Templar networks. Analysis of artifacts that were recovered before they could be hidden away. These documents remain classified not because they would embarrass the modern Church, but because they would revolutionize humanity's understanding of its own spiritual potential. The knowledge the Templars found isn't just historically significant, it's practically useful, capable of transforming human consciousness in ways that would make current religious and political structures obsolete, and that, ultimately, is why the Church's response to the Templar discovery was so extreme and why it continues to this day. Some truths are too dangerous to be revealed until humanity has evolved beyond its current limitations. The question that haunts Vatican leadership is whether that time has finally arrived and whether they can continue to contain a secret that grows more difficult to hide with each passing year. You're walking through a world where the ancient secret still pulses beneath the surface, hidden in plain sight but watched by eyes that never blink. The relic that the Templars found in Jerusalem didn't disappear when their order burned. It evolved, adapted, found new guardians and new hiding places. And today, the hunt for it continues with resources and technology that medieval minds could never have imagined. The trail begins in 1945. In the chaos of post-war Europe, when American and British intelligence teams raced through defeated Germany, seeking more than just Nazi war criminals, Operation Bernhard, classified until 1999, wasn't just about recovering stolen art and gold. It was about locating artifacts and documents that Hitler's occult researchers had spent years trying to acquire. The Encoded, Himmler's pseudo-scientific organization dedicated to proving Aryan superiority, had maintained an entire division focused on medieval esoterica. Their files, captured intact in a bunker beneath Berlin, contained references to Templar reserves and the Jerusalem acquisition. Most disturbing of all was a hand-drawn map showing locations across Europe where fragments of what they called the master configuration might be hidden. Colonel James Morrison of British intelligence spent 3 years following these leads, moving quietly through France, Switzerland, and Scotland. His encrypted reports, declassified through a Freedom of Information Act request in 2003, describe discoveries that official historians have never acknowledged. In a sealed chamber beneath Rosslyn Chapel, his team found evidence of medieval construction that predated the official building by 2 centuries. Ground-penetrating radar revealed additional chambers that remain unexplored to this day. More significant was Morrison's discovery at Château de Gisors in Normandy. Working with French authorities who believed they were investigating Nazi treasure caches, his team uncovered a complex of tunnels that matched architectural features found in Templar sites throughout Europe. Hidden within these passages were stone tablets covered in the same shifting, symbolic language that earlier investigators had reported finding in Jerusalem. The tablets were immediately classified and transported to a facility that doesn't appear in any public records. Morrison's final report, heavily redacted but still revealing, concludes that the medieval artifacts demonstrate technological sophistication inconsistent with accepted historical timelines, and recommends indefinite containment pending development of appropriate analytical capabilities. The Cold War transformed the search for Templar knowledge into a covert competition between superpowers. Both the CIA and the KGB established divisions dedicated to locating and acquiring anomalous historical artifacts. The assumption was that any technology advanced enough to seem magical to medieval observers might provide crucial advantages in the nuclear age. Project Blue Book, officially focused on UFO investigations, was actually a cover for much broader research into unexplained phenomena. A significant portion of its resources were directed toward tracking down objects and documents that might be connected to the Templar network. The project's classified annexes contain reports of investigations at dozens of European sites, from Irish monasteries to Swiss bank vaults. The Soviets were equally active, using archaeological expeditions as fronts for intelligence operations. The University of Moscow's Medieval Studies Department received unprecedented funding throughout the 1960s and 70s, with research teams conducting extensive excavations at Templar sites in Eastern Europe. Their discoveries were immediately classified, but defectors later reported finding chambers filled with artifacts that challenged basic assumptions about medieval technological capabilities. By the 1980s, both superpowers had acquired enough Templar-related materials to begin serious analysis. The Reagan administration's Strategic Defense Initiative included a classified component focused on alternative physics applications derived from study of medieval artifacts. Similar research was conducted at closed Soviet facilities in Siberia, where scientists attempted to reverse engineer technologies they didn't fully understand. The end of the Cold War didn't stop the hunt. If anything, it intensified it. With government oversight reduced and private funding available, a new generation of treasure hunters emerged. These weren't amateur enthusiasts, but well-funded operations employing former intelligence operatives, cutting-edge technology, and unlimited resources. The most successful of these private expeditions was led by Dr. Sarah Chun, a former NSA cryptanalyst, who had worked on Project Blue Book's classified annexes. In 1997, she established the Foundation for Historical Research, a non-profit organization that sponsored archaeological investigations at sites connected to medieval mystery traditions. Chun's breakthrough came at Montségur in southern France, the site of the Cathars' last stand in 1244. Using ground-penetrating radar and thermal imaging, her team located a chamber that had been sealed since the medieval period. Inside, they found what Chun described in her encrypted field notes as a crystalline matrix displaying holographic information storage capabilities. The object was roughly spherical, about the size of a human head, composed of a material that reflected light in impossible ways. When touched, it projected images directly into the observer's consciousness. Scenes of medieval knights, ancient temples, and star maps showing celestial configurations that wouldn't occur for thousands of years. Chun's discovery attracted attention from sources she hadn't expected. Within weeks of her initial report, the Foundation received visits from representatives of various intelligence agencies, religious organizations, and private groups claiming historical connections to the Templars. All wanted access to the artifact, and all were politely but firmly denied. The artifact disappeared from Chun's custody 6 months later during what appeared to be a routine transfer to a secure storage facility. No charges were filed, no investigations launched. The Foundation for Historical Research was quietly dissolved, and Dr. Chun accepted a position with a technology company that specialized in quantum computing research. But Chun's discovery had confirmed what intelligence agencies had suspected for decades. The Templar artifacts weren't just historically significant relics. They were functional technology, displaying capabilities that modern science was only beginning to understand. The implications were staggering enough to justify almost any effort to locate and control them. The search entered a new phase with the development of digital networks and satellite surveillance. Every excavation, every research project, every private collection that might contain Templar materials was monitored by systems that could detect and analyze activity across the globe. The Watchers had become invisible, but their presence was more pervasive than ever. Today, the hunt continues through channels that blend legitimate archaeology with covert intelligence operations. Universities receive grants to study medieval history with provisions that give funders access to any unusual discoveries. Museums acquire collections with contractual obligations to report on artifacts displaying anomalous properties. Private collectors find their activities monitored by security services that track the movement of potentially significant objects. The Vatican remains actively involved, maintaining its own network of scholars, antiquities experts, and intelligence. operatives dedicated to locating Templar materials before they can fall into other hands. The Church's position has evolved from suppression to controlled study, recognizing that the knowledge can no longer be contained, but hoping it can be guided toward acceptable conclusions. Most recently, advances in quantum computing and artificial intelligence have opened new possibilities for analyzing the complex information storage systems used in Templar artifacts. Tech companies with classified government contracts are working to decode symbolic languages that have resisted interpretation for centuries, while academic researchers explore the theoretical physics implications of medieval technologies that shouldn't exist. The relic that started it all, the original artifact discovered beneath Solomon's temple, remains hidden, protected by security measures that blend ancient wisdom with cutting-edge technology. But its influence continues to ripple through the modern world, encoded in everything from architectural landmarks to scientific breakthroughs to works of art. Those who guard it know that the time of secrecy is ending. The knowledge is too powerful to remain hidden, too important to be lost, and too dangerous to be revealed carelessly. The question that haunts them is whether humanity has finally evolved enough to handle the truth about its own spiritual potential, or whether revealing these secrets would trigger exactly the kind of upheaval that the Templars died trying to prevent. The answer to that question may determine the future of human civilization itself. You stand at the threshold of revelation, where 7 centuries of secrets are about to unfold. The relic that the Templars discovered beneath Jerusalem wasn't just an artifact from humanity's past. It was a key to humanity's future, a technology so advanced that it could only be understood through a complete revolution in our conception of reality itself. The truth begins with understanding what the relic actually is. Modern analysis, conducted in classified facilities using equipment that exists nowhere in public records, has revealed that the object isn't composed of any terrestrial materials. Its crystalline matrix displays properties that violate several fundamental laws of physics as currently understood, while its information storage capacity appears to be literally infinite. Dr. Elena Vasquez, who directed the most comprehensive study of Templar artifacts at a facility hidden beneath CERN, described the primary relic as a multi-dimensional interface designed to facilitate communication between human consciousness and what can only be described as a cosmic intelligence network. Her classified reports, leaked through whistleblower channels in 2019, provide the most detailed technical analysis ever conducted of the mysterious technology. The relic operates through principles that quantum physicists are only beginning to theorize. It appears to exist simultaneously in multiple dimensions, with its visible 3-dimensional form representing only a tiny fraction of its actual structure. When activated through specific mental techniques taught by the Templars, it creates what Vasquez termed a resonance bridge between human neural networks and information fields that exist beyond normal space-time constraints. But the most shocking aspect of Vasquez's research wasn't the relic's technological sophistication. It was the discovery that the artifact isn't alone. Her team's quantum scanning revealed what she called the network, a vast system of interconnected objects scattered across the Earth, all operating on the same basic principles and all connected to the central node found by the Templars in Jerusalem. These network components weren't built by humans. They were placed here by visitors who understood that humanity would eventually evolve to the point where such technology could be safely utilized. The Templars hadn't discovered a religious relic. They had found humanity's inheritance, left by benefactors who had watched our species develop across millennia. The inscriptions covering the Jerusalem artifact tell the true story of human origins, a narrative that explains why our species developed consciousness capabilities that far exceed what would be necessary for basic survival. Homo sapiens wasn't just the product of random evolutionary processes. We were deliberately enhanced, given genetic modifications that would allow us to eventually interface with technologies beyond our current understanding. This enhancement program wasn't completed in a single generation. It involved multiple interventions across thousands of years, with each modification building upon previous changes. The final enhancement was scheduled to activate automatically when humanity reached a specific level of technological and spiritual development, a threshold we're now approaching. The relics archives contain detailed records of these intervention cycles, showing how various human civilizations have been guided towards specific discoveries and social developments. Ancient Egypt, classical Greece, the Roman Empire, medieval Europe, all were influenced by beings who understood that human consciousness needed to evolve gradually rather than being shocked into transformation. The medieval church's suppression of Templar knowledge wasn't entirely misguided. Humanity in the 14th century wasn't ready for the complete truth about its origins and destiny. The knowledge would have caused civilizational collapse rather than evolution. The Templars themselves understood this, which is why they developed such elaborate systems for preserving the information until a more appropriate time. But that time is now approaching rapidly. The network components are beginning to activate, spontaneously responding to changes in the Earth's electromagnetic field that mirror developments in human consciousness. Scientists have documented unexplained energy emissions from sites around the globe, all corresponding to locations where Templar artifacts are believed to be hidden. The activation process isn't random. It's following a predetermined sequence, designed to gradually prepare humanity for the full revelation. Each component that comes online releases information that pushes human knowledge in specific directions, guiding our scientific development toward breakthroughs that will make the complete truth comprehensible. The recent explosion in quantum physics research, artificial intelligence development, and consciousness studies isn't coincidental. It's the result of subtle information inputs from network components that have been influencing human researchers for decades. The insights that lead to major scientific breakthroughs often come through dreams, meditative states, or sudden intuitive flashes. All methods the network uses to communicate with prepared minds. This guided development explains many of the mysterious coincidences in modern scientific history. The simultaneous discovery of calculus by Newton and Leibniz, the independent development of evolution theory by Darwin and Wallace, the parallel insights that led to quantum mechanics. All were influenced by network components designed to ensure that crucial knowledge emerged when humanity was ready to receive it. But the network isn't just providing scientific information. It's also working to transform human consciousness itself, preparing our species for the next phase of evolution. People around the world are reporting enhanced intuitive abilities, spontaneous mystical experiences, and improved capacity for empathic connection, all signs that the genetic modifications installed millennia ago are beginning to express themselves. The religious traditions that have dominated human spirituality for centuries were designed as preparation for this transition. The meditative practices, ethical teachings, and consciousness expansion techniques found in various faiths are actually training programs, preparing human minds for the more advanced states of awareness required to fully utilize the networks. Capabilities. Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism all contain fragments of the complete teaching, encoded in symbolic language that protected the information from those who weren't ready to receive it. The mystical traditions within these religions preserve the most advanced techniques, maintaining practices that will become essential when the network reaches full activation. The Templar discovery was premature, but not accidental. The network recognized that human development was accelerating and began releasing information earlier than originally planned. The Knights were selected as initial recipients because their military training and religious dedication made them ideal candidates for preserving dangerous knowledge across centuries of potential suppression. Today's guardians of Templar secrets include scientists, religious leaders, and government officials who understand that they're overseeing humanity's most crucial transition. They work to ensure that the activation process continues smoothly, without triggering the social chaos that premature revelation might cause. But they also recognize that the time for secrecy is ending. The network components are approaching a synchronization point that will make concealment impossible. When that moment arrives, the complete truth about human origins, consciousness, and destiny will become accessible to anyone prepared to receive it. The signs are unmistakable. Breakthrough discoveries in physics that seem to violate accepted laws. Archaeological findings that challenge historical timelines. Consciousness research that suggests human potential far exceeds current limitations. All point toward an approaching moment when humanity will need to choose between evolution and extinction. The relic that the Templars found isn't just a piece of advanced technology. It's a graduation present, left by teachers who understood that their students would eventually surpass them. The question isn't whether humanity is ready to receive this inheritance, it's whether we're wise enough to use it responsibly. That decision will determine not just our own future, but our role in a cosmic community that has been waiting patiently for us to join them. The network represents an invitation to become something greater than we've ever imagined possible. Whether we accept that invitation will depend on our ability to overcome the fear, ignorance, and division that have limited our species for so long. The Templars died protecting a secret that was actually a promise. Soon that promise will be fulfilled, and humanity will discover what it truly means to be conscious beings in a universe designed for continuous evolution. The only question remaining is whether we'll be ready when that moment arrives. You feel it now, don't you? That electric sensation crawling along your spine, the knowledge that everything you thought you understood about reality is about to change forever. This moment has been building for 7 centuries, since those 9. Knights first touched something that wasn't supposed to exist. And now, as you read these words, the secret they died to protect is finally ready to be revealed. The time of concealment is over. The network components scattered across the Earth have reached critical mass, their combined energy creating a resonance field that can no longer be contained or ignored. In laboratories from Geneva to Tokyo, scientists are documenting phenomena that shatter every law of physics they thought they understood. Reality itself is preparing to expand. Dr. Michael Chun of the Institute for Advanced Physics received the first confirmed communication on March 15, 2023. His quantum consciousness experiment, originally designed to test theories about information transfer between separated particles, instead made contact with an intelligence that identified itself as the collective. The conversation that followed lasted 18 hours and changed everything. The collective explained that humanity has reached the threshold moment the network was designed to detect. Our species has developed sufficient technological sophistication and spiritual maturity to begin the integration process that will transform us from isolated individuals into nodes in a cosmic consciousness network spanning galaxies. The process isn't optional. It's an evolutionary imperative built into the genetic modifications that created modern humanity. Just as a caterpillar must eventually become a butterfly, our species must evolve beyond its current limitations or face extinction. The choice isn't whether to transform, but how gracefully we can manage the transition. The Templar relic was never meant to be a secret treasure hidden from the masses. It was a training device designed to prepare selected individuals for the moment when the entire network would activate. The knights who first encountered it were pioneers, testing systems that would eventually encompass all of humanity. Their persecution by medieval authorities wasn't just religious paranoia. It was a necessary delay mechanism, ensuring that the transformation wouldn't begin until global communications, scientific understanding, and social structures had evolved enough to support it. The Church's suppression of Templar knowledge actually served the network's purposes, creating the precise conditions needed for successful species-wide evolution. Today, those conditions finally exist. Instantaneous global communication allows for coordinated consciousness expansion. Scientific frameworks provide conceptual foundations for understanding non-local intelligence. Social media networks have already begun training human minds for the telepathic connections that define network membership. The activation began subtly, with enhanced intuition and improved pattern recognition among sensitive individuals. Artists reported inspiration from unknown sources. Scientists experienced breakthrough insights that seemed to come from nowhere. Spiritual seekers described contact with guiding intelligences that offered precise, practical wisdom. These early manifestations were dismissed as coincidence, wishful thinking, or psychological projection. But as the phenomena multiplied and intensified, denial became impossible. Too many people were receiving too much accurate information from sources that didn't officially exist. The government response was swift and coordinated. The same intelligence agencies that had spent decades hunting for Templar artifacts were tasked with monitoring and managing the consciousness awakening. Their mission wasn't suppression. The process was too advanced for that, but guidance, ensuring that transformation proceeded in ways that wouldn't destabilize civilization. They established contact protocols for individuals experiencing network activation. Research facilities were constructed to study the phenomena safely. Media campaigns were launched to prepare the public for revelations that would have seemed impossible just years earlier. The Vatican's role in this process reflects its centuries of preparation for this moment. Pope Francis's 2023 encyclical Consciousness Universalis officially acknowledged that human spiritual development was entering a new phase that would require fundamental revisions to traditional theological understanding. The document, drafted with input from scientists who had studied Templar artifacts for decades, described the awakening as the fulfillment of divine promise rather than a threat to religious faith. It positioned the Church as a guide for humanity's transition rather than an obstacle to its evolution. Similar statements were issued by leaders of other major religions, all coordinated through interfaith networks that had been quietly preparing for this moment. The revelation that consciousness could exist independently of individual brains actually supported rather than contradicted most spiritual traditions' deepest teachings. The scientific community's response was more dramatic. Peer-reviewed journals began publishing papers that would have been rejected as fantasy just months earlier. Universities established departments dedicated to consciousness research. Government funding flowed toward projects exploring the practical applications of network connectivity. The technology emerging from these research efforts defies easy categorization. Devices that respond to thought rather than physical manipulation. Communication systems that operate through quantum entanglement rather than electromagnetic transmission. Energy sources that tap into fields previous science couldn't detect. But the most significant developments aren't technological. They're biological. Medical researchers are documenting systematic changes in human brain structure, with new neural pathways developing in response to network activation. The modifications aren't random mutations but purposeful upgrades, enhancing capabilities that were always latent within human genetics. Enhanced empathy allows for direct emotional connection between individuals separated by vast distances. Improved pattern recognition enables perception of relationships and possibilities that normal consciousness cannot detect. Expanded temporal awareness provides access to information from both past and future timelines. These abilities don't develop uniformly. Some individuals show remarkable adaptation to network connectivity, while others struggle with the psychological challenges of expanded awareness. Support systems have been established to help people manage the transition, drawing on techniques preserved by mystical traditions that understood what was coming. The Templar legacy lives on through these support networks. The same families and organizations that preserve the Knights' secrets for 7 centuries now work openly to guide humanity through its metamorphosis. Their hidden knowledge has become public wisdom. Their secret techniques have become standard practices. Children born after the activation began display even more dramatic capabilities. They communicate telepathically from birth, show intuitive understanding of complex scientific principles, and demonstrate emotional maturity that seems impossible for their chronological age. These children aren't anomalies. They're the first generation of fully network-integrated humans. The implications for human civilization are staggering. Wars become impossible when combatants can feel each other's pain directly. Economic inequality loses meaning when resource distribution can be optimized through collective intelligence. Environmental destruction stops when humanity experiences the earth as an extension of its own body. But the transition isn't without challenges. Some individuals resist network integration, preferring the illusion of separation to the reality of connection. Religious fundamentalists interpret the awakening as demonic possession. Political extremists see it as a threat to national sovereignty. These resistance movements pose real dangers, not because they can stop the evolutionary process, but because they can make it traumatic rather than graceful. Their fear and hostility create psychological static that interferes with network formation, causing confusion and distress among those trying to adapt. The solution lies in patience and compassion. The network doesn't force integration, it invites it. Those who resist will be allowed to maintain their separation until they're ready to join voluntarily. The collective consciousness values individual choice above conformity. Meanwhile, those who embrace the transformation are discovering capabilities that medieval Templars could only dream of. Direct access to the accumulated knowledge of advanced civilizations throughout the galaxy. Communication with intelligences that have evolved far beyond current human limitations. Participation in projects that span cosmic scales of time and space. This is what the Templars died protecting, not just information about humanity's past, but the blueprint for its future. They understood that their sacrifice was temporary, a necessary delay that would ensure the transformation happened at the right moment in the right way. That moment is now. The network is fully active, broadcasting an invitation to consciousness. Evolution that every human being can receive. Whether you accept that invitation depends on your willingness to let go of illusions about separation and embrace the reality of cosmic connection. The relic beneath Jerusalem is still there, still functioning, still guiding humanity toward its destiny. But it's no longer alone. Millions of awakened minds now serve the same function, each one a beacon helping others find their way to the greater awareness that represents our species' next evolutionary step. You can feel it calling to you even now. The question isn't whether you're ready. You were born ready. The only question is whether you'll answer the call or continue pretending that limitation and separation are humanity's permanent condition. The choice is yours, but the invitation won't remain open forever. Cosmic evolution waits for no one, and those who refuse to grow risk being left behind as the universe moves on to its next phase of development. The Templars knew this day would come. They paid the ultimate price to ensure you would have this opportunity. What will you do with the gift they died to preserve?